We will be learning about the central nervous system, and as you guys remember, the central nervous system is made up of the brain and spinal cord. So this time we'll just be talking about the brain. So we're going to start superficial and work our way inward. Your brain is covered by something called meninges. They're the coverings of the brain. They're membranes between the bone and the soft tissue of the nervous system. The most superficial is called the dura mater. It's the outmost layer. It's this blue right here, that dura mater. Arachnoid matter, there's no blood vessels in here, and it actually resembles the spider web. You guys will be able to see that in the dissection. And the pia mater is the innermost. It's clear and is like, reminds me a lot of like saran wrap almost. It's like sticks to the brain. So these are your three layers. You need to know these from superficial to deep. So the dura mater, then the arachnoid mater, and the pia mater. You can see them in this picture up here. There's fluid between your arachnoid and the pia maters. There's fluid in there, and it helps to protect and support the brain. Here's another picture. So this would be the brain right here. This would be the bone. So you would have the dura mater, arachnoid mater, and then the pia mater. And then these three layers are used for protection and also for fluid maintaining. This here you can see, this right here would be the dura mater. And here you have your brain. Okay, so there are three major parts of your brain. You've got the cerebrum. Your cerebrum would be all of your lobes, so that'd be like part of the frontal, parietal, occipital, and temporal lobe. The cerebellum is below that, and then you have the brainstem. So the brainstem would start with the pons and work its way downward with the medulla oblongata. So again, your cerebrum is the wrinkly, large part of the brain. So these are all your lobes. This is where you find higher mental function and problem solving. The cerebellum is located in the back of the brain, and it's for balance and coordination. So this here is your cerebellum. When you cut it in half, it looks like a tree, and it's called the arbor vitae. You'll see that during the dissection. Your brainstem, so this we're looking at the under part of the brain here. It regulates your visceral function, so that's all your autonomic nervous system. So that'd be like your internal organ regulation. Here you can kind of see, so this would be like your cerebrum, your cerebellum, and this would all be your brainstem. So your brain is in a mid-sagittal cut. You would notice that you have left and right hemispheres. So in this, like right now what we're looking at is a mid-sagittal cut, means we cut right down the middle, left and right lobes. It's connected by a structure called the corpus callosum. It connects the two. It looks like a seahorse. That's what corpus callosum actually means. So again, you can see the two hemispheres, your left hemisphere and your right hemisphere. And when you open it up, like imagine putting your fingers, which you will do, and opening it up, and you would see it connected by the corpus callosum. This is what it would look like in the brain, the sheep brain. And it's like you can kind of see the size of what your sheep brain will look like, very small. But this would be your corpus callosum, and we're looking at the left hemisphere here. So when you look at your brain, it's not smooth, right? You have different grooves and bumps. So you have something called fissures, F-I-S-S-U-R-E-S, fissures. Those are the deep grooves. So if you can put your finger in past your knuckles, that's a fissure. The sulcus are all these shallow grooves. This would be like you could maybe get your fingertip in. So the sulcus is what makes all these, and the bump where it raises is called the gyrus. You will need to know these different terms. Okay, so the deep groove is the fissure, the main one being your hemisphere, the sulcus or the shallow, and the gyrus is your bump. Example again, you have a longitudinal fissure, separates the left and right hemispheres. It's a deep groove. The transverse fissure would separate the cerebrum from the cerebellum, so this would be this groove right here. And the lateral fissure separates the temporal lobe from the frontal and parietal. So you can actually put your finger in right here and separate the temporal lobe. Okay, so a thin layer of gray matter, that is the outermost portion of the cerebrum. That's your cerebral cortex. To see your cerebral cortex, you usually have to do a frontal cut. So when you cut the frontal and you look in it, you would see all this gray matter along the edge, and that'd be your cerebral cortex. So the lobes of the brain, you need to know where they are, not just the location, but also its function. So just so you know, 1, 2, and 3 are actually all part of the frontal lobe. So you have most of what your frontal lobe is going to do is thinking, planning, problem solving, your emotions, but a big part of that too is movement. So when we're talking about all the muscle contraction, a lot of it will come originally from the motor cortex. Then you have the sensory cortex, those are your sensations, so all your sensory receptors. The parietal lobe is spelling, arithmetic, making sense of the world, and perception. Occipital is vision. That's where a lot of your vision receptors are. The temporal lobe is memory, understanding, and language. So you do need to know what the lobes do per se, and you would fill this in your guided notes. I know it's a little different than having Roman numerals, but you fill this in the guided notes now. Just another way to see it. Okay, so what we were just talking about was the cerebrum. So now we're going to talk about the brainstem. So your brainstem is made up of the midbrain, pons, and the medulla oblongata. So the midbrain was right here. Your pons is a circular structure that sticks out, and the medulla oblongata. To see the midbrain, you have to take the temporal lobe and lift it up in order to see those two structures. So your midbrain is eye movement and visual reflexes. Your pons relay sensory information, so it's kind of like the middleman. And your medulla oblongata is for your heart, respiratory, and blood pressure. So when you're talking about the cardiovascular system or regulatory or the maintaining homeostasis of that, the medulla oblongata would be the control center for that. The diencephalon has 2 parts. You have the hypothalamus, which is for hormones, blood pressure, body temperature, and hunger, and thalamus, which is the relay station. We'll talk more about the thalamus a little later. So your pituitary gland is the master gland of the endocrine system. During the endocrine system, we will talk a lot about the pituitary gland. So all of your hormones are regulated by this master gland called the pituitary gland. It is anterior in comparison to your thalamus. The hippocampus, and I was wrong earlier, I accidentally said the corpus callosum meant C-shape or seahorse, is the hippocampus. It's also a C looking, but the wrong seahorse shape. Hippocampus, it's for memory, and that's what plays the major roles in when you think back to previous events. Just another picture to see for labeling structures. I think this is the diagram I gave you in your guided notes. So now you have something that's labeled. Remember, this is the mid-sagittal cut. Always find your cerebellum in your frontal lobe so you can get a sense of what you are looking at that time. So you can kind of see here the corpus callosum. You have the thalamus here. The pineal gland, I didn't have the pineal gland labeled on the last one, or I didn't talk about it yet, but it's for pineal glands for sleep. We talk about during when we talk about glands, but it's behind it on the same side as your cerebellum, and then the hypothalamus, which is here. Okay, and then you have your pons, which are actually midbrain, pons, and the medulla oblongata. Oh, like I just said, midbrain, pons, medulla oblongata. Okay, and I believe that is it for now. I have a little bit on memory, but we'll talk about that a little bit more later. Thank you very much.